I thought this album was so good. From beginning to end, I was obsessed with its sound. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Molly, and in today's video I'm going to be ranking all of the studio albums from the indie pop duo Beach House. Somehow Beach House just manages to elicit so much emotion through just the sound of their music, and as different as their albums are, they all still have that quality about them that I love, kind of this emotional, atmospheric side to their music. I love each and every one of these albums, but I thought it would be kind of fun to just do a little ranking of all of the albums and give my thoughts and opinions on each one. This is also a video that was recommended a lot in my comments. It seemed like at least some of you kind of were interested to see a Beach House album ranking, so yeah, I figured I would make one. Hopefully you all enjoy it, and let's dive on into the ranking. Alright, so we have my little ranking system pulled up here. A+ are, in my opinion, perfect albums. The A's are going to be albums that are extremely close to perfect. B's are right in the middle, so solid albums, not necessarily standouts, but absolutely not bad at all. C's are kind of just meh, kind of fade into the background albums, and then D's are just my personal least favorite albums from the artist. So I'm going to just go in order of when Beach House released their albums. So that means we are starting off with their self-titled album Beach House. This one came out in 2006, and this album, it's kind of a shorter one. I think it's like 30-something minutes. I think it's their shortest album, and it just has such this laid back, beachy, almost tropical sound to it. Very relaxing to listen to. That's kind of Beach House's whole sound. All of their albums have that quality, but especially their earlier albums, specifically their debut album, I really picked up on that heavily. But yeah, it almost just kind of rocks you to sleep. It has this very smooth, melodic percussion to it, kind of like a softened percussion. It's not real in your face or loud at all. It's a very almost muted album, you could say, but it just has this really great laid back atmosphere to it. At points too, this album kind of gave off like an old English sound to it. There were mandolins or some sort of instrumentation going on that it just made me think of like King Arthur times, like old English sounding instrumentals at certain points. I thought that was kind of cool on this album. Apple Orchard is a great track, again, just giving off those beachy sounding vibes. There's almost a very soothing, repetitive, wave-like sound to this one. To the whole album, but I picked up on it a lot on this track in particular. Master of None with that nice groove to it, and then with the slightly distorted vocals. I think this is my favorite track off of their debut album. And then House on the Hill is really transfixing too. I like kind of the gong sounding percussion toward the end of this track. So overall, I think Beach House, the debut studio album from the band, I feel pretty comfortable putting this one in B. I don't think it's a standout. It's definitely not their best work, but it definitely has some moments on it that really shine. I love Master of None. That track is just great in my opinion. Up next is Beach House's 2008 album Devotion. This one again continues that great beachy, laid back vibe that their first album definitely had. However, with Devotion, I just found it way less memorable. For some reason, there weren't a lot of standout tracks on this one for me. They kind of all just sounded the same in a way. I just found like on their debut albums, there were moments that really made my ears perk up and listen and pay close attention, and I didn't really get that at all on Devotion. I hate saying that because there is a great flow to this album. The tracks just go from one to the next really well. They make great use of ambient noises too, but I don't know, I just wanted a lot more from this album and I never got it. The tracks Holy Dances and All the Years for me are kind of examples of just that very one-note monotone of this album. They just didn't get me. I don't know, they didn't capture my attention enough. I know that Beach House, their sound in general is kind of that more monotone, very relaxing atmosphere to their music, but on other albums they change it up just slightly enough where it really keeps you engaged as a listener, and I didn't get that on Devotion. So with all that being said, it kind of pains me a little bit because I'm not at all saying that this is a bad album. Just in the context of Beach House and the rest of their work, I think Devotion I'm going to put in D. It's just not really a standout for me personally. Up next is Beach House's 2010 album Teen Dream. Now this one does have a little bit more of almost a dramatic delivery on it. They do a lot of unique stuff with the sound on some of the tracks on this album, which that's kind of what I was lacking from Devotion. The track Silver Soul, I absolutely love how this one just builds up so much. There's something almost kind of melancholy to the sound of this track. Also, the track Norway has really, really interesting percussion to it. And then that paired with the chanting, angelic-like vocals, I just thought it made for a really interesting track to listen to. And then 10 Mile Stereo, I think is my favorite track off of this entire album. It is so expansive sounding. And then with the cymbals and everything toward the end, it just really packs a punch, but it's also still pulled back and very melodic in that soft beach house way that all of their music is. I think it's a fantastically crafted album, and again, they just infuse a tiny bit more on this one that to me do make it stand out just a little bit more. It's still not quite in A+ territory for me personally. I think I do prefer it over their debut album though, so I'm gonna put Teen Dream in A. I think it's just a really well done album, very compelling to listen to. There's a couple moments where there's a little bit of a lull and it'll drag like the tiniest little bit, but there's enough standout moments where I still think it's a really fantastic album. Up next is Bloom, Beach House's 2012 album. This one I loved. I found it super compelling to listen to. There's still that whole beachy, dreamy sound to this album, but they're just infusing more change up on the sounds. They've got like some synths going on and sound effects and ambient stuff, and it just makes it more interesting to listen to. This album is just so cohesive. From one track into the next, it just works beautifully. At times, dare I say, it was almost too cohesive. There were a couple moments on this album where, again, just like Teen Dream, it kind of lulled just a tiny bit. It was a little bit stagnant. I specifically want to pick out the track New Year. I'm sorry if this is your personal favorite track on this album. For me, New Year was one of those moments. I wanted a little bit more. I think Myth as the opening track is fantastic. It still has that relaxing quality to it, but then with the soft synths going on, again, it just adds a little bit of a flair to this track. I think it sets a great tone for the whole album. Irene, in my opinion, just makes for such a gorgeous closing track to this album, and I think the last hidden track is kind of unnecessary. But overall, across the board, I think Bloom is fantastic. I just have like those tiny little nitpicky things about it, but for me, Bloom is an absolute A. And I prefer it over Teen Dream, so I'm going to put it right there in A. Up next is Depression Cherry. This one came out in 2015. I will fully admit, the first time I listened to Depression Cherry, I thought it was good. I didn't think it was great. I thought it was good. Let me tell you, the more I listen to this album, the more I absolutely fall in love with it. It gets better and better with each listen, hands down. I think it's just a gorgeously crafted album. It's a little bit more, I think, pulled back, maybe a little bit more restrained and melodic compared to some of their stuff. I mean, in general, Beach House is pretty melodic and more subdued in their sound. I think this album is like the most understated, the most quiet in that regard, but it just is beautiful. The more you listen to it, you can really appreciate how well it's put together. There's just such a beautiful, hypnotic, trance-like sound that this album has from beginning to end, and the tracks are all layered really beautifully too. Space Song, of course, is like probably one of the band's most well-known songs, and for good reason. I love this one. I think it's an amazing track. Also, the track 1037 is really interesting. Again, the first time I listened to this album, this track was one of my least favorites at first. And then the more the track goes on and the more I listen to it, it continues to grow on me even to this day. The soft percussion of it, I don't know, it just pulls you in. It's really entrancing. And then the track Bluebird, I think, is my favorite song off of Depression Cherry. This one is so beautiful. Just the percussion on it paired with the soft vocal delivery, I think it's just hypnotic. It's gorgeous in a kind of melancholy way. It pulls at your heartstrings a little bit, and I love that. I love when music can elicit emotion like that. So I'm going to cut right to the chase. Depression Cherry is a grower for sure. Upon listening to it more and more, I appreciate this album that much more. So it has moved up to A+. Depression Cherry for me is right at the top. It's such a gorgeous album, and I think it is well deserving of an A+. Up next is Thank Your Lucky Stars. This is Beach House's 6th album, and it was released in 2015. And this one is kind of interesting. I feel like it has this almost old-fashioned sound to it, kind of like oldies you would hear playing over the radio. That's kind of the vibe it gave off to me. Very, very relaxing, so melodic. Again, just a really nice, beautiful album to listen to. But this one for me is kind of like Beach House's second album, Devotion, in that it was kind of unmemorable. I just kind of wanted a little bit more oomph from this album, if that makes sense, a little more personality, and I never really got it. So I think Thank Your Lucky Stars, I'm going to put in C. It just was kind of unmemorable, faded into the background for me. And last up, we have the album 7. This is Beach House's most recent album, and it is also appropriately their 7th album. This one came out in 2018, and I love this one. I think it has such amazing power to its delivery. It's just a great blend of Beach House's typical kind of slow melodic sound, but they just add a little bit of like a punchiness to it. There's a little bit more of a groove to the tracks on this one. And there's also just a little bit more of an intense, darker sound to this album, which to me make it stand out a little bit more in their discography. Dark Spring is just such a cool opening track. Again, it just has more of that ambient, darker quality to its tone. Lemon Glow, I think, is my favorite track on this album. It has such a vibrancy and a freshness to its sound. And then the track Drunk in LA, again, with just a little bit more intensity to it. It kind of has a little bit of a darker sound to it as well. Black Car was another standout. Again, with its heavier percussion, especially at the end. I just love that direction for Beach House, and I thought this album was so good. From beginning to end, I was obsessed with its sound. So if it's not obvious already, I think 7 by Beach House is an A+. I would put it above Depression Cherry. I think it's fantastic. So there you have it. That is my final Beach House album ranking. In A+, the perfect albums in my opinion, we have 7 and Depression Cherry. In A, which are albums that are still pretty close to perfect, we have Bloom and Teen Dream. In B, so kind of the middle of the road albums, we have their debut album, Beach House. In C, so kind of the ones that just fade into the background for me, we have Thank Your Lucky Stars. And then in D, which are my personal least favorites, just the ones that I don't really ever go back to listen to, we just have Devotion. So that is going to wrap up my little ranking video for all of Beach House's studio albums. Beach House, again, is a fantastic band. Every single one of these albums is really good. They all just elicit such emotion through the sound and the atmosphere that Beach House puts on these albums, and I think that's amazing when a band can do that. Definitely let me know down in the comments what your favorite album from them is, and if you agree or disagree with my ranking, I would love to hear all of your thoughts and opinions. But yeah, as usual, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned, and I will see you in the next video.